Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because we know people are joining from different parts of the world. My name is Pradeep Nayak, and I am at the University of Waterloo in Canada. I'm also representing here the Vulnerability to Viability Global Partnership for Strengthening Small-Scale Fisheries Communities. I'll be moderating this particular webinar today. I will first start with a few rounds of introductions, and I will introduce the Vulnerability to Viability Global Partnership first, and then I will introduce the thematic webinar series for which we have gathered here today, and then I would introduce our esteemed speaker of the day before we start to listen to our speaker, and then there would be opportunity for question and answer at the end of the webinar talk. So welcome everyone to the first webinar talk of 2023. So just as an introduction to the Vulnerability to Viability Global Partnership, which is a transdisciplinary research, knowledge, and action network with over 100 members from Asia, Africa, and Canada, and internationally. The goal of the global partnership is to support small-scale fisheries in their transition from vulnerability to viability. And the way we understand and work on vulnerability and viability is not just in the economic sense, but also to include all aspects of human life: the political, the cultural, the environmental, and other aspects of human existence. Our focus is fourfold. We focus on co-creation and co-production of knowledge, and the knowledge that is essential to engage in transition from vulnerability to viability. My apologies. We also want to take this knowledge, the co-created knowledge, and create a repository or a database in the form of an information system so that it can inform policy, practice, and science. We also aim to develop transdisciplinary capacity development processes, and this particularly involves the kinds of capacities that are required to engage in processes of transitioning from vulnerability to viability. And finally, we also aim to synthesize and integrate the knowledge that is generated across the different case study sites for informing the governance and policy and practice. The V2V Global Partnership aims to identify the diverse factors and conditions contributing to the vulnerability of small-scale fisheries and engage collaboratively with small-scale fisher communities and other NGO, government, and university partners to enhance small-scale fisheries viability. We're conducting transdisciplinary community-engaged research in 6 countries in Asia. That includes Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, and Thailand, and 6 countries in Africa. That includes Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tanzania. In doing so, the B2B Global Partnership brings people and organizations together across physical, cultural, and disciplinary boundaries through a shared interest in addressing global change impacts on small-scale fisheries. The B2B thematic webinar series, for which we are here today, is an initiative of the B2B Global Partnership to facilitate and generate high-level discussions on vulnerability and viability themes and topics within the context of small-scale fisheries, but also focusing on community-based resource management and community empowerment. The goal is to feature academics, government representatives, practitioners, and members of the civil society who have made significant contributions to the theoretical, practical, and policy aspects of small-scale fisheries and community-based resource management, both locally and globally. B2B thematic webinar series takes place on the last Friday of every month, and it will continue to be so during the year 2023. The series is available internationally through live streaming on YouTube. Details regarding the monthly webinar, including speakers, topics and titles, and links to webinar platform is available on our website, which is www.b2bglobalpartnership.org. Today's webinar is the first, or our inaugural webinar of 2023, in the series of V2B thematic webinars planned for the entire year. And it is the 25th webinar talk since January 2021, when we actually started. And it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Professor Kumar Mandal as our distinguished speaker today. Dr. Mandal is a distinguished professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. He is a cognitive neuropsychologist by training. In his past and current work, Dr. Mandal has focused on the areas of neuropsychology and cognitive sciences in many places. He is also an adjunct professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, and an honorary professor at Sri Sri University's Faculty of Comparative and Behavioral Sciences. Dr. Mandal's work explores different research paradigms and domains of science to propose hybrid and non-expert-based knowledge and methods as a way to respond to the complex social environmental problems. He is passionate about research that brings significant impact on people's behavior and the implications of this approach for sustainability. Dr. Mandal's novel and non-traditional research framework has tremendous relevance for our own approach of vulnerability to viability transitions as a way forward for building resilient communities. His current work focuses on the science and practice of happiness and the measurement of happiness, and we will hear a bit of that in the talk. It is my honor to invite Dr. Kumar Mandal to deliver today's inaugural talk for the V2B thematic webinar series 2023. And his talk is titled as Community Resilience, a Framework for Non-Traditional Field Research. Thank you very much, Dr. Mandal, and I invite you to take the floor now.
Thank you, Professor Nayak. I think it's a pleasure and privilege to be amongst you today. And greetings to all of you, those who have joined this webinar. Well, the topic that has been given to me, rather, I also had the opportunity to customize it to my area of interest currently, is community resilience. Now, before I actually talk about it, it's important that what is that I'll be talking to you in next 45 minutes and what is that I would not be. So it's rather limiting myself to certain areas and also letting you know what I'll not be discussing. Well, as Professor Nayak has just mentioned, I'm basically a cognitive neuroscientist. And for the past few decades, actually, most of my work was related to understanding human behavior through the functional architecture of the brain, which is basically a lab-based work and clinical work. But over a period of time, I could realize that probably the whole gamut of human behavior I would never be able to capture if I remain in the lab. So for the past 1 decade, I have come out and started understanding human behavior in the natural setting. And that becomes a prelude for my talk. And why did I do that? Because I found there is a basic contradiction in understanding human behavior from 2 different approaches. One is a very holistic molar approach, other is a very analytical and molecular approach. When we try to understand a human behavior through a molar approach, the molar scientists say that molecular approach is nothing but useless redundancy, reductionism. While the molecular scientist or the behavioral scientist in the micro level understanding of behavior, they believe that if you try to understand human behavior as a whole, it leaves you nothing but history of human experience. The advantage I had that I, being in the field of cognitive science, I could posit myself as a social cognitive psychologist who has some glimpse of food besides. And with this as a bit of my personal interest and capacity, I thought I'll be talking about community resilience. And why did I take this particular topic? There is a reason behind it. The reason is that, as Professor Nayak has just mentioned, that your thoughts are, your research are basically geared towards Southeast Asia and some of the African nations in general, while I would also be referring about India in particular. Here, if you try to understand most of the theories that are available in the book, they are based from Western theories. And we all know, as Harry Trandis once said, that 75% of the theories have come from only 25% of the human population. Three-fourths of the human population have never been tapped. So my interest was to learn more about people based on which no theory has ever been proposed. My second interest was this, that while in government duties, I had the opportunity actually to travel 3,500 kilometers in the Trans-Himalayan region. And I could see through my experiential viewpoint, several such villages in difficult and in very adverse terrain, how people survive there. And it's something to learn, though it was never my formal theoretical training. This 15 years of experience in the Trans-Himalayan region gave me a different kind of viewpoint about human behavior. So I thought I'll tell you about such kind of viewpoint with a framework and how we can undertake research through non-traditional framework. So this is the basis behind my talk. And I'll not talk certainly about economic resilience, or psychological resilience, or environmental resilience. These are not the areas I'm going to take up. So I'll take up only about the community resilience. And if you see, there are three major important terms that I have been using here. One is the community, one is resilience, and one is non-traditional research. So I would like to first explain these three before I actually go ahead with my talk. When I talk about community, I'm not talking about where there is a resource redundancy or resource sufficiency. I'm talking about those communities where resources are scarce, resources are limited, and people have difficulty to garner support from outside sources. I'm talking about such kind of community who live in villages. And why I'm interested in rural India? Because India lives in villages. We have about 450,000 villages. Three-fourths of India lives in villages. So each village has its own resource availability and own resource strategy. I'm not going to talk about each one of them, but I would give you a very generic picture about the community in terms of their collectivism. Because the Southeast Asia, in particular India and those areas where you actually research on, our social fervor is actually collectivist in nature and not individualistic in nature. And when I say collectivist, it means that your personal identity is known through your affiliation with the group identity or integrity. That is, your identity depends upon the group integrity. And your activity is known for common interest, not in terms of individual pursuits. So when I refer about the community, I refer about a collectivist community where individual pursuits are meaningless, common goal, common interest are more meaningful, and integrity with the community is more important than identity as an individual. That's the framework for me as community. When I talk about resilience, I'll not talk about resilience post a disaster, maybe economic disaster or environmental disaster. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about where people can bounce back after repeat shocks. It means on daily life, they have got repeat shocks. I'm not talking about catastrophic disaster. So resilience in terms of the repeat shocks they face and how do they actually recover from them and how do they actually transform them to a new phase of their adaptability is something which I would be referring about. But this I'll tell that they are a mechanism of social adaptiveness through innovative learning because they have to innovate every day. That's why they are innovative. So anything that we do not copy is innovation. And the third important key term that I wanted to tell you is about a non-traditional research. Now, we all know that since we are all doing research and we are in a university system, we all know what is a traditional research. A traditional research for the kind of activity that we all do, it has got several explanations in the books, theories, and literature, like case study method, like interview method, like questionnaire method. I mean, so on and so forth. I'll not refer about any traditional research method. I'll talk about adaptive methodology, where you actually develop a methodology through transdisciplinary framework. And that's what Professor Nayak mentioned about it. So I was intrigued by that it has to be transdisciplinary, not interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. So I'll refer about that at the end of it. And then when I talk about non-traditional research, it's not content-driven. It's actually context-driven. So the context becomes very important where we actually do this research. And also, this research is exploratory in nature rather than explanatory in nature. That is, the exploratory research we try to generate hypotheses rather than try to test a hypothesis as we do it in explanatory research. So with this understanding of the key terms, which we are just going to explain hereafter, let me tell you what is the model that I thought I'll talk to you about this community resilience. So when I looked into the literature, in fact, I got hundreds. So I thought I'll take something which is very generic in nature. And when I looked into several such literature, I found that in each of this model referring to community resilience, there are two main aspects. One is about resource redundancy. Other is called social adaptive capacity. So resource redundancy or robustness or sufficiency, whatever you say, it means how much resource you have, whether you can actually have the capacity to utilize that resource or not, or whether you have got the backup in case the resource doesn't work for you under certain conditions. So that's resource robustness or resource sufficiency or redundancy, whatever you say. In my model, in my talk, I'll talk about resource insufficiency, resource deficiency, resource limitedness, rather than resource robustness. Where there is all these things available, we know how resilience can actually take place. But in my talk, it is just the opposite of it. And then we talk about adaptive capacity. Now, adaptive capacity is something where we have got institutional memory, shared experience, connectedness. We have got mutual valuing rather than reciprocal othering. And we have got innovative way of adapting, and which I call it as transformational learning. So adaptation to transformation will be the focus in my talk. And mutual valuing, reciprocal othering, connectedness, institutional memory are part of the adaptive capacity. So with this note, let me tell you where I'm going to focus hereafter. Two main areas I'm going to focus hereafter. Let us see what are those two areas. One such area is community resilience in resource and limited environment, and other is non-traditional research method, as I just spoke to you. So when I talk about community resilience and resource limited environment, means how people utilize the innovative learning to power their social adaptive capacity. Because in a resource redundant environment, the capacity would be different. But in a resource limited environment, the capacity has to be different. People have to innovate the resources based on whatever material is available with them indigenously. And when I talk about non-traditional research method, I talk about this research method to capture this ordinary magic. Because when there is no resource, but people can still survive effectively, and not only survive, they adapt effectively, and not only adapt, they actually transform beyond adaptation. So this I call is an ordinary magic. And how to capture that ordinary magic through non-traditional research method will be the focus at the end of it. So I've got several study frameworks. So how can I study this? As Professor Nayak has just mentioned, that vulnerability viability is one framework. That is how I can heal somebody's pain and how I can deal with that pain, in order to survive effectively. So vulnerability is surviving and viability is thriving, in my way of understanding vulnerability to viability. So I'll refer it as healing versus dealing. The second framework that is possible is whether I'm going to discuss universal versus community-centric framework. The universal framework is generally done in a top-down manner to develop a theory. Theory of collective resilience or a model of collective resilience, which can be tested later. But my concentration would be more on community-centric, because I believe every community has its own set of resources, which other community doesn't have. Therefore, it's important to capture how do they actually utilize those resources through certain generic principles. So I'll be concentrating more on community-centric framework. And then there is a framework called adaptational versus transformational. These are all related concepts. So I thought adaptational versus transformational is also a framework where we not only adapt, we transform ourselves. Adaptational means, going back to the predetermined state of equilibrium. Transformational means a new state of equilibrium. We not only adapt or go back to our basic framework of adaptation or equilibrium, we actually go to a new level altogether. So that's transformational. And another framework is a structured innovation versus autonomous innovation. Structured innovation is a top-down innovation, which you all do in the university system, where there is expertise available, there are infrastructure available, capital available, the intellectual property available, and people try to focus on a particular subject matter in a structured manner. But autonomous innovation is an innovation where everything is bottom-up. There is nothing available, but you still innovate. And that innovation is captured in a book, a recent book. I have just referred about that, you can see, where people can spot opportunity in adverse condition. People can do more with less. They can improvise a condition with very simple means. So that's the kind of framework I'll be taking, and I'll refer about autonomous innovation in slightly greater detail. So in next 3 to 4 slides, I'll be concentrating more on autonomous innovation. And then, of course, I'll go back to the non-traditional research method. So when I try to talk about adaptation to transformation via autonomous innovation, it's important to understand what we mean by that. Let us see the picture first. The picture that we see is actually a double-decker living root bridge in one of the northeastern states of India called Meghalaya, where there are hundreds of river streams, hundreds. And it's not physically possible for the government to actually create a bridge for each of these river streams. So villagers had problem. So they thought they will create their own bridges. So what they did, there are a lot of rubber trees available in those areas. And because of high rain, frequencies, they grow very fast. So what they did, they utilized this rubber plant root, which is very tough and at times tougher than steel. They shaped this live bridge, live roots in the form of bridge. And this is a very prominent feature in Meghalaya. And these bridges, you can actually go over these bridges with a car even. They are so strong. And they haven't spent a single penny for that. So this is the kind of innovation I'm talking about, which is very simple, which is very inexpensive, within the constraints, of course. They are insightful breakthrough because they could realize that the rubber tree root is a very strong root. It can be utilized in lieu of some composite material or steel. So they did this breakthrough through incremental problem solving. And they used a community-based shared experience because this experience they had through generations. So they thought that instead of trying to adapt to older condition, let us create a new condition. So this is the way they have been transforming their lives through autonomous innovation. But these innovations, if you try to understand our terminology through academia, they are not the kind of innovation we talk about. When we talk about innovation, we say that there must be no knowledge to new knowledge, or there must be a capacity for me to challenge the existing knowledge, or there must be the capacity to me to find out some surprise element into the existing knowledge, at least. Then only it can be called as innovation. But those are all structured kind of innovation. So let us try to understand this kind of science which villagers have been doing without having any formal knowledge or education behind them. I call them commonsensical science. The commonsensical science is a science that bends the scientific rule into one's favor. They don't know the science, but they actually bend the scientific rule into their own favor. Actually, I can give you some examples. Like you see, a farmer is actually charging a cell phone with a solar panel at his back. So there is no electricity connection there, but he uses, mobile phone, and he can charge it using a solar panel at his back. The bottom of it, if you see, the boy is catching fish, and of course, small scale fisheries have been a central and cardinal feature for V2V, engagement in Bangalore University. So you see that this boy has innovated something with the help of a spinning wheel. So he actually grounds the spinning wheel and catches fish using that spinning wheel. And he doesn't stay all through the day, and he does it the way he would like it. So these are non-linear way of doing some kind of innovation, which maximize the resources, is very flexible, very instinct-driven solution, because they all fly kites. And since they have got kite flying experience and having spinning wheel in their hands, they thought they will utilize this particular mechanism to catch fish as well. So they're very frugal in nature and very, very impactful. So it's important, therefore, for us to understand why these frugal and impactful innovations are changing people's life. Now, I have gone through a literature by a person called Bahadur. I'll show it to you next slide. This person has actually referred about 5 different kinds of characteristics or parameters for these kind of frugal but impactful innovation. These innovations are inductive innovations because they don't use any expert system. They are inductive, non-expert based system. Inductive means where the solution of a problem is not inherent within the problem. So it's a non-expert based system. It's indigenous system because everything is locally available. As I said, every community has its own local resources. What is available with the fishes community may not be available with a community who is in the middle of the country like MP, Madhya Pradesh. Now, India has 7,500 kilometer border, coastal border. So in every coastal border, you will find a community, and every community has their own local indigenous resources. They're very inexpensive in the sense that they can easily afford it. They can very easily access it. So they are inexpensive. They are very intuitive in the sense that they do not actually finally get into a product, but they are good enough product for their day-to-day activity. As I said, to avoid the repeat shocks, they become a good enough solution for their day-to-day problems. Like a double-decker live route bridge is good enough for them because they want to cross over the river. So that's good enough for them. And they are iterative. In the sense, if the research is top-down, you have to actually fulfill all kinds of technical parameters in order to come up with a solution. But here in a bottom-up research, every day you actually revise it. Every day you visit your own solution. And every day you make sure that there is some improvement in the next edition of your innovation. So they are actually a bottom-up innovation. I'll give you some examples. One such example is a bamboo fish trap. This bamboo fish trap is utilized by one of the tribal groups in Hyderabad. That's another state in the eastern coast of southeastern coast of India. They use this bamboo trap because the bamboo is readily available over there. And once the fish is trapped, the fish cannot go out. So they do fishing using this bamboo fish trap. You see the photograph down below that getting water through tube well is a difficult muscular activity, which only adults can do. But here you see there is a water filtering pump, which is a seesaw based. This is children play with those seesaw in the evening and get the water. So they play, enjoy their game, and water oozes out. And not only that, there is a filter also attached to it. They get filter water out of it. So these are some of the innovations which we may say a very iterative, very intuitive, very inexpensive, indigenous, and inductive way. So the problem is that, I'll talk about this problem of the innovation. Let us first try to see how the transition from this vulnerability to viability took place. Now, this transition takes place because the solution is solved horizontally. Everyday challenge is answered. They deliver more value at a lower cost, fight inequality, promote sustainability, and brings autonomy. Autonomy in the sense, it's their will. Affluence, of course, in a country like India, affluence is something which is not everybody's property. But what everybody can enjoy in this country is autonomy. We believe that you may have all kinds of affluence, and if you do not have autonomy, and if you cannot use those affluence, whatever you have in hand, then you probably cannot be happy. So for us, it means that if I have got the autonomy, whatever resources I have, if I can utilize the way I would like to, then it gives us a lot of well-being, a lot of happiness. And finally, of course, it creates new relationship and it enhances the society's capacity to act. I'll give you an example through a photograph once again. And this is the photograph if you see. This is the water wheel. It's a very unique solution. The Velo got it through Canadian Grand Challenge. Now the team came here. They found that women are actually carrying 10 liters of water in their head, and they are walking miles in order to fetch water from remote terrains of Rajasthan and some of the areas in Madhya Pradesh. So they came up with the concept of water wheel. And in this water wheel, they can actually carry 50 liters of water while they cradle their baby at hand. And that's very easy. Easily it can be done. Actually, this project has won actually Canadian Grand Challenge as well. And today, in those sectors, with the help of these NGOs, people have been fetching water without having any difficulty. And they are carrying 50 liters of water at one go. Earlier, 5 people used to actually carry 50 liters of water, and that too through a difficult terrain. So this is the transition that is from adaptation to transformation. This is vulnerability to viability, and not only surviving, also to thriving. Not only healing, it's also to dealing. This is possible because of collective intelligence. In an individualistic society, the individual's intelligence matters. But in a society like ours, it is the collective intelligence which matters. And collective intelligence is possible because there are shared input. because there are empowerment within the people. They have the autonomy to actually, find a solution together. They do not have the problem of the identity. They can change the behavior not only individually in a community at large. So they engage in social R&D. Social R&D is nothing but an interplay of theory and practice. I call it as inverted evolution, because when there is an evolution, there is a serial process. Its evolution is never reversible. Evolution has a deterministic framework that everything is determined. But in an inverted evolution, that is what I have said in the form of autonomous innovation, it's reversible, it's parallel, and people can continue to learn in that process over a period of time. So when you see this picture, you will find that students did not have a good washroom. So they created washroom by designing themselves and having the water jars as their urinals. So the group of students actually got the award from the Prime Ministers of India as well, because this is a very innovative way the collective intelligence has been utilized. The plasticity of thoughts, empowerment of the students empowered themselves in that process. It's a social R&D, and it's an evolution. And they have actually today, this is the photograph I have been showing you 3 years back. And today they have come up with their new innovation. They have come up with all kinds of system within the toilet using the local resources. So the question is, then if everything is there, why do we need to do research? Why do I talk about non-traditional research framework? Everything is in place. The matter is not so simple. So it's very important to understand, why do we need to do a research? We need to do research because such innovations are mostly one-hit victory story. One successful, but that's all. It was never sustainable. Then non-expandable model, you can't expand it. Suppose the children have developed a toilet in one school. Can they actually expand it to other schools as well? Probably not. And all such effort are amateurish effort. Amateurish effort will not give you the scalability. The scalability is very important, because if innovation doesn't have scalability, then probably it will never help the community at large in a big way. So the problem is that we wanted this research to be done here, because we need to promote such innovations with the help of the technology, with the help of the research that will tell us that how the idea is generated, how the idea is staged, how the thought has been processed. If we understand the genetic viewpoint behind it, probably we would be able to understand it better. So suppose fishing, if it is the small scale fishing, if it is the focus of your thought, if it is scalable, then we can integrate it to an aquaculture system. For a country like India, it would be a huge benefit if we can come out with this scalability. As I said, 7,500 kilometers worth of coastal areas. So fishing has been a great tradition all over. But people have been only motivated to survive better rather than transform their life. So it's important that we do some kind of scalability. So when I talk about doing research, I'm not talking about having technologies. I can talk about how technologies can develop by identification of the principles of application, discovery of solution, and translation, and through end-user integration. I can talk about that, but that's not the focus for me. My focus is that we are all social scientists, and we have been all doing research not in the field of technology. We have been doing research in the field of understanding the socio-cultural milieu of the community who are of our interest in those cultures. So let us see, what do I mean by the research framework? So there could be 5 different kinds of research framework. It can be a bottom-up framework like autonomous, or a structured framework. So we have already discussed about it, not going to discuss about it again. There could be a framework which is exploratory versus explanatory. In the beginning, I said the purpose of this kind of research would be generating hypotheses rather than testing hypotheses. In explanatory research, is a top-down research, we actually test hypotheses. So here we would be interested more in exploratory research. Then there is a research which I call validity versus utility. Because it's a bottom-up research, we are not going to talk about validity through non-traditional research framework. We are going to talk about the utility of such research in public at large. And then there could be a framework for systems research versus analytical research. System research is also a top-down research, which is interdependence of subsystems, but analytical research is solution-centered framework. And finally, we have got a conventional framework versus a non-traditional research framework. So we can utilize any such framework. Probably we'll be utilizing a mix of these framework. I'm going to talk to you in next 3 or 4 slides before I end is about non-traditional research framework, which may help us actually taking such kind of mission forward. So let us see, what do I mean by non-traditional research? So when we talk about a non-traditional research, it's a response to idiosyncratic, it's a peculiar research scenario where people can do some kind of brainstorming or idea swarming or thought stitching. Now, idea swarming is a condition where nobody talks to another person. I mean, it's not brainstorming, it's actually brainstorming. They all think in one particular way how to get rid of the problem, and they try to stitch their thought through discussions that may not be focused exclusively on the problem. So it's a research scenario where such kind of research, non-traditional research needs to be taken up. And it's a deliberate choice. If someone is interested in doing non-traditional research, it's a deliberate choice. Why should I call it as a deliberate choice? Because there are 2 ways we can do research. Doing research right and doing right research. Doing research right is a top-down research that I must follow all the methodologies. Doing research right. But there are some research which is, I say, doing a right research. That is, which is solution focused, where there is a problem already. So if I have to do something, undertake such research different from other research, which I can also term in the form of thinking differently rather than thinking different things. This is called adaptive methodology. I'll talk about adaptive methodology, which is a non-traditional methodology, not found in the book otherwise. And a non-traditional research is also deliverable. It may not take the form of a published work. It can, of course, provided we have the right kind of journal which encourages such kind of research. But 99.9% of the journal follow a particular pattern. They are very much a traditional. They follow a particular trend. Like there should be a strategy, there should be a heuristics, there should be logistics, there should be tactics, there should be statistics. All these steps must be followed systematically, and then only you can communicate this research. But what I am trying to talk to you is about adaptive methodology, where you actually develop a methodology through transdisciplinary manner. Let us see, what do I mean by adaptive methodology? The adaptive methodology is actually something where you do not follow a specific step. That is, normally we have a theory or strategy, then we go for a literature survey, which we call heuristics. Then we have got certain tools, which I call logistics. Then you have got certain research methodology, which I call tactics. Then you analyze data, which I call statistics. Here in adaptive methodology, right from your topic selection, if you have a topic particularly in hand, and then you find that it is the data when you collect, that it is not explaining the topic that you have selected, you can change the topic. If you change the topic, you have to change the literature as well. If you change the literature, you have to change the logistics as well. So at every level of your research, you adapt. And this adaptation process is not a waterfall kind of mode. It's more an agile method. So here the research design becomes very iterative, bottom-up, community engaged, and transdisciplinary. What President Naik was just mentioning. Transdisciplinarity is something which is different from interdisciplinarity or multidisciplinarity. Let us see what adaptive methodology is all about. The normal research is generally a plan-driven. We submit our research plan and we undertake a PhD or a postdoctoral research with a very clear focus in mind. This is my research title. So it's plan-driven. There is a cost, there is a schedule, everything is planned. We call it waterfall. It's a linear process. But when there is an adaptive process, it's a very agile process. That is, it's a value-driven process. And the idea is to actually find the scope, generate hypothesis, find the solution, which is value-driven, not plan-driven. This adaptive methodology is something which I believe is a purely non-traditional way of doing research. And why? Because this is transdisciplinarity. Disciplinarity means when you focus in one particular discipline. But as I understand it, the framework that you have for research is more than multidisciplinary, where there are more than one discipline actually interact with each other. It's more than interdisciplinary. You not only try to interact through different disciplines and find overlap, you do something else, which is transdisciplinarity. Transdisciplinarity is something where you actually develop a new methodology, where the whole research idea is problem focused, not theory focused. So as I said, most of these researchers, 99% of the researchers are theory focused, because as long as you do not have a theoretical proposition, you probably would not be tested. Therefore, it is plan driven. But transdisciplinarity is a research where the research is about developing a methodology to understand a problem rather than only solving a particular problem. So this transdisciplinarity is a unique feature of non-traditional research viewpoint. There are many ways to do this non-traditional research. I'll not go into great detail about it. I'm about to complete it. I have given some examples of it because they need to be researched because they themselves is a research topic, like rapid assessment research. These are intensive team-based qualitative inquiry. There is a qualitative comparative research. When you do qualitative research, we know there is phenomenological research, narrative analysis, there are grounded theory approach, a lot of qualitative approach. But in qualitative approach, we never try to test a theory. We never try to compare between two groups or two communities. But there is a method which is called qualitative comparative research. It's possible to do collective case studies where multiple case studies sequentially or parallelly you can actually work on to appreciate a particular issue. There could be audio ethnography. Audio ethnography is something where your personal experience as a researcher, along with the specific cultural group, you can try to understand how people are actually finding their thoughts expressed through different ideas. Likewise, there is something called dialogical introspection, where the data are collected from the researchers themselves. If there are 10 researchers who have gone to a village, the researchers themselves actually collectively observe their experience induced by a social event. They don't ask anybody else. They actually all observe through structured manner. And through that, they actually come through a scientific introspective investigation. That's called dialogical introspection. There is something also called second person intersubjective inquiry, which is like collective whispering, as I said. The co-inquirers actually work together about the questions of mutual concern. They may not be discussing about each other, but they are all thinking in one particular way. Now look, in literature or in Google, you may not get the reference of each on these references. Probably you will get an input, a hint about it as well, only. But then the idea behind non-traditional research framework for such kind of studies is to develop a methodology themselves and then try to focus the problem so that a better solution can be observed through replication. Finally, I propose a social Silicon Valley. A business model is very important because it's a field of practice rather than attention to theory. It's a matter of better adoption than out-of-box thinking, because in structured innovation, we think of out-of-box thinking, but it's more of feasibility of available material rather than getting a new material. It's more about strategic thinking than outright success. It's more about having some accelerators than having some management gurus. And it's about creation of social value than digital silicon valley. The photograph that you see is a fish kiosk in Tamil Nadu. It runs so well as a business model. Now, such a business model needs to be created. That is because the reason is that if we have to help people who are into this small, micro, medium kind of ventures, they need to be understood first, and a solution must come, which is a replicable process as a business model. So by social Silicon Valley, I mean where the valley lives and learns together. So with all this note, I would like to leave this matter here itself. If there are some sources and acknowledgements, which of course you can consult it at a later point of time. So with that, thank you so much. I would like to stop it here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mandal. That was not only interesting, but so many areas to focus on, and the inspiration that comes from your talk is tremendous. So and particularly from the point of B2B transitions that we are talking about. All these ideas have a thread connecting to the B2B approach, and there's much to discuss and see how we can take some of that into our actual case study work that we are doing. So we are waiting for some questions, and I'm going to read the questions that we received through our YouTube viewers. Okay, so there is one question that is from Ruel Mia, and Ruel is asking, thank you for the presentation and clarifying the important concepts. I was wondering, how would you differentiate between transition and transformation in the context of your study and small scale fisheries and resource management?
Well, transition is a process, transformation is an outcome. I mean, that's in one sentence I can tell. But since I do not have much experience in reference to small-scale fisheries, I consider it as a business model which needs to be upgraded to the extent that a new state of equilibrium is pursued rather than simply sticking to the people's livelihood. So that's very important. So in order to do that transition and leading to transformation, we think that there must be a proper link between a structured innovation and autonomous innovation. That is the job of a social scientist. The job of a social scientist is to integrate technology to the society. As of now, as I said, if I have got a bowler approach only, we'll never get to know that what is the process behind it. If we have only a molecular approach, we'll never get to know how a human behavior functions. Therefore, I believe the approach is to develop an adaptive methodology to understand the transition first, and then once the outcome comes up, then of course it becomes a transformation, and that transformation may not be a replicable phenomena all over. Each level of transformation will also be iterative. It is just not one particular level of transformation. Every day it will grow. That's the way I think about it.
Thank you. The next question is from Dr. Derek Armitage from the University of Waterloo. And Derek is asking, thanks for the many interesting points and reminder of the scope for methodological creativity. I am wondering if you could provide an example and a bit more on this idea of an adaptive methodology and how that fits with ideas of rigor, transferability, and so on.
Well, probably that's what the challenge is, that adaptive methodology is a concept. It has not, if I had to upgrade it to a level of construct, because concept and construct are two different things. When I have a construct, I can go beyond the layman concept, that is the layman concept of innovation, then I have to isolate those variables. And once I isolate those variables, I should be able to find out the appropriate logistics to measure it as well. If I can measure that, then probably I will be able to come out with the proper methodology which can be standardized. As of now, it is adaptive methodology, means which is customized to my requirement. It's not a standardized process of doing it. An example, it can be, there can be many examples that if I have got a rapid assessment method post a disaster. I mean, I remember I had to do some work in Orissa super cyclone and also after tsunami. I mean, when you make an assessment, you feel that you will ask people as a social scientist, but actually there is no scope to ask people. You have to find out a method through which you can develop some structured observation with people around you who can actually target certain events within the society or within that particular phenomenon. And then when you come back, you collectively decide that what could be the possible way you can actually help the community at large. So it's about developing a rapid assessment methodology rather than there is already a methodology based on which I can do such activity. So I think these methodologies are unique methodologies in the sense every such methodology that I said, like we can have a first person methodology, we can have a second person methodology, we can have a third person methodology. Third person methodology is a methodology where we actually utilize third person methodology. You actually give a questionnaire to someone and they give a response. That's a third person. The first person methodology is a methodology where you actually are the researcher and you give the answer for your question. That's like introspection. But second person methodology is unique here in particular in this situation, because these are more phenomenological kind of research methodology. How things appear before you. So we call it as intersubjective selfhood. That is, you not only see yourself, you see others, and then develop a sense about what others are thinking, what I am thinking. It's like a difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy, if I have got the sympathy, I understand somebody else's pain. But if I have got empathy, I not only understand others' pain, I actually put myself in their shoes. So this intersubjective selfhood is something which is second order methodology, which is not a first person methodology or third person methodology. I think adaptive methodology is juxtaposed between first person methodology and third person methodology. That can be very well. I'm sure, because I have searched Google everywhere and I have searched everywhere. I thought I'll try to understand adaptive methodology from the context of this community resilience. In fact, collectively, it can be taken forward. If you ask me, I do not have a right answer for this, but this is what is my viewpoint.
Thank you once again. The next question is from Maria Batagalia. And Maria is asking, thank you very much for an inspiring talk. My research area of focus is social norms in small-scale fisheries. I wonder whether you talk about collective, when you talk about collective behavior, acting in the interest of the collective, you conceptualize it as a social norm. That is, I do it because others do it. Or a moral norm, I do it because I think it is the right thing to do. Or a custom. I think Maria is asking your viewpoints on the different types of analysis he's doing.
So actually, I think this is, if you understand the social norm, we have to go back to the work of Hofstede, 1971. Hofstede talked about that when we talk about a social norm, you are actually referring to a collectivist society. I mean, their collective fervor, the network of relationship, that's more important. And when I said that if you follow, this is a controversy between identity versus integrity. I mean, if I am known against a particular norm or against a particular group's norm, my work is known against that group norm, it means I have to de-individualize myself. That de-individualization process is actually a group norm or a social norm. Now, there is nothing such theoretically collectivist. Everything is breaking today. I mean, but still, when we talk about social norm, I refer to about a collectivist social fervor, where common good is considered more important than individual pursuit. Therefore, I say that if I have to do research in this area, I'll try to see the right research rather than doing research right. So I'm referring about right research in a bottom-up fashion, in an iterative fashion using adaptive methodology that will give something which I will call it as a exploratory research rather than an explanatory research. The fundamentals of this research is to develop hypothesis rather than test hypothesis.
Thank you once again, Dr. Mandal. I don't see any questions now, and we will receive them in the next couple of minutes or seconds. I have one question to ask you about the collective resilience piece that you talked about, collective resilience or community resilience. Coming from systems theory, often a lot of literature talks about the resilience of the system, and that has been one of the areas of criticism for resilience perspective or lens. How do we differentiate, or do we need to differentiate between collective or community resilience vis-a-vis, say, for example, in a household or individual resilience, because they do really matter in certain communities because of the disparities in wealth and disparities in privileges within the communities itself. So is there a need to differentiate and pay particular attention to collective resilience vis-a-vis other kinds of non-collective resilience, which can be individual, households, or groups?
When we talk about collective resilience or systems level resilience, is an interdependence of subsystems. When we talk about interdependence of subsystems, then environment will come into picture, technology will come into picture, society will come into picture, economy will come into picture. So a systems view is a view. The primary idea is to develop a theory or a model, which is generically, pan-culturally can be addressed. An analytical view, opposite to systemic view, is actually solution focused. I mean, which is more in terms of, if I call it in this way, proactive preparedness versus retroactive management. So an analytical framework is more in terms of proactive preparedness, that if you can develop a framework, then you do not have to think in terms of retroactive management. So both frameworks are required. I think at a system level, the humanity must have some degree of generality. But humanity also have a sort of individual difference or analytical framework. So we often say that human behavior is, it has its own limit because of its system. But within that limit, it can function limitlessly. Therefore, it's important that we understand both framework and then utilize the resources both in the individual as well as in the resources of the community. I can give you a reference if time permits. I was actually going through the history of a girl, who is selected from India to go to Mars. Actually, Elon Musk actually had 2.5 lakhs applications, out of which only 24 people are selected worldwide. And one such girl who is a BTech student from Kerala, she has been selected. So I was trying to understand what is the basic feature in and how did they select her. I found the entire framework is a resilience framework. The entire framework because the entire process was psychological. It was done by a Holland-based company. The entire framework is a resilience framework. that he would be able to bounce back. So an individual framework is very much important depending upon the goal orientation. But a community framework is equally important because there is climate change, there are resource crunch, there are war, there is everything going on. I guess both framework is equally important academically, but unless they are deliverable, they will remain in the books. Unless we consider people at large, that is, as I said, 75% of the theories are based on only 25% of the human population. Unless we change our focus, probably the society is not going to benefit by either.
Thank you. We don't have any other questions, but since we have got you here and we want to learn from your wisdom, I wanted to ask you something very specific to the research that we are doing within the V2V partnership. So our focus is on doing case studies in small communities around the world, small scale fisheries communities around the world. And of course, as you have mentioned, we fall into the adaptive transdisciplinary, modes of doing work with the communities itself. But with regards to your reference to this transition and how transition can reflect an intense process of doing things, what are some of the advice you would give from a theory, from a practice point of view, in how we should develop these case studies, where the key motivation is to understand ways in which these communities can transition from vulnerability to viability situations?
Actually, the vulnerability, viability, I word it at adaptation to transformation. From, if you ask me, I'll word it from adaptation to transformation. Now, if you try to focus only on adaptation, probably a case study would be important. But if you really want to understand transformation, you have to do collective case studies. In collective case studies, there is no method given. And when you do collective case studies, we do not compare between the two case studies because we believe they are orthogonal to each other. But this mindset problem has to go because communities are different. They have idiosyncrasies, they have got peculiarities, but there are certain commonalities as well. So when we try to appreciate the resilience as a framework across the communities, then we'll understand that more than solution, their mindset, how they function. I call it as collective whispering, brainstorming rather than brainstorm. That is, they all find solution in silence. So there must be a methodology which we should develop in terms of collective case studies. If you have collected 10 such cases, there are certain commonalities. And these commonalities, we can get it qualitatively, we can get it quantitatively, but that's what the challenge is all about. Adaptive methodology is not having a methodology and then following. It's actually developing methodology and to generate hypotheses about it. So I think that it's a good area of research how collective case studies can be taken forward as a method.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I see there are two questions that have come up. I'll read both of them to you and let you respond to both of them together before we bring it to an end. So the first question is by Indus, and Indus is asking, thanks for the thought-provoking talk. I would like to know how does non-traditional research is different from participatory research. And then Idrisu Amadou is asking, thanks for the insights. I see collective efforts in terms of resilience fall under what is broadly noted as self-organization in resilience literature.
Mm-hmm. So basically, participatory rural appraisal is something, a participatory method is a known method. We follow a semi-structured method. But here, in the kind of methodologies I'm trying to advocate or provoke thoughts is about having some kind of research methodology which will go. In participatory research methodology, you actually ask them to participate in a brainstorming session. I have been repeatedly saying this thing. It's a brainstorming session. That is, you think in silence and come out with a solution at some point of time. You don't discuss it. In participatory method, you are vocal, verbal. But in collective whispering, in brainstorming, you don't talk to each other. You are party to their thought process. You develop a thought process, sync yourself, align yourself with their thought process. Then probably you would be able to understand what they are thinking. Because that's a second person methodology, neither first person methodology, what the community is thinking, not the third person methodology, what you think as an observer to the observed. It's intermediary between these two. Since it is intermediary between these two, it has got a special reference as what I call as adaptive methodology. And the other question I just forgot, what is that reference?
One is, thanks for the insights. I see collective efforts in terms of resilience fall under what is broadly noted as self-organization in resilience literature.
So self-organization is the community as a self also. If it is reference to the community self-organization, then probably it's the other way I'm referring about collective intelligence reflected in community resilience. So that organization, of course, if you try to understand how people think about it, that thought process I wanted to capture. In fact, through adaptive methodology, what I could not find in the 3,500 kilometer bordering areas where I traveled very frequently in sub-Himalayan terrain because of my job, of course, I could not understand where from they garnered their strength. Is it simply a survival mechanism? I found no, it's much more than that. So they must have organized their thought at certain level, and that may be very specific to that community. So there might be some generic principle of organization, there might be some specific principle specific to that community. Understanding that will help us only replicate to some culture who actually suffer in silence. That's the fundamental motive behind it.
And there is a helpful comment here from Alice D. Morales. She's saying, this is an interesting comment, as not all collective efforts are actually self-organized, so that's important to note. So I think we are at time, and thank you very much, Dr. Mandal, for the inspiring and really meaningful discussion that we had based on the questions. I'm sure this discussion is going to continue outside this webinar as well, because you have really raised so many questions and so many areas that needs our engagement and further deliberations. So thank you from all of us here at the V2B Global Partnership, but also thank you to all the participants who asked really interesting questions, and there seems to be a lot of interest in the non-traditional framework of doing research, and I hope to continue this discussion further. We do not have a particular talk for February yet, but please watch the space on our website, which is www.b2bglobalpartnership.org, and also our Twitter. So we'll be tweeting out, and stay tuned to the next talk in February and following months in 2023. Thank you once again to everybody, and goodbye from me.
Thank you. Pleasure and privilege once again. Thank you so much.